The wrench slipped from Amy's oil-stained fingers as the ship shuddered violently around her. Emergency lights bathed the engine room in angry red, and somewhere above her head, people were screaming. She pressed her ear to the cold metal deck, listening to the vibrations that told her everything she needed to know. Those weren't engine problems making the ship shake like this. Amy Torres had spent 19 years learning to read the language of starships. Her father had taught her every bolt, wire, and circuit in the mining vessel Meridian's Edge. She could tell the difference between a failing gravity generator and a damaged hull breach just by the way the floor hummed beneath her feet. Right. Now, the ship was telling her they were under attack. "Amy!" Her father's voice echoed through the narrow corridors between the massive fusion reactors. "Get to the emergency pods." She grabbed her toolkit and ran toward the sound of his voice, ducking under low-hanging conduits and jumping over pools of coolant that had started leaking from damaged pipes. The Meridian's Edge wasn't a warship. It was a simple cargo hauler, carrying refined metals from the outer colonies back to Earth space. They didn't even have weapons, just basic shields that were already failing if the sparking control panels were any indication. Tom Torres stood at the main engineering console, his weathered hands flying over controls as he tried to keep the ship's power system stable. Sweat dripped from his gray beard, and his eyes had the focused look Amy knew meant he was fighting a losing battle against physics itself. "Dad, what's happening?" Amy skidded to a stop beside him, already reaching for the backup power controls without being asked. "Raiders," he said simply. "Kravek, from the look of their energy signatures. They've knocked out communications and they're boarding us deck by deck." Amy's blood went cold. Everyone in human space had heard stories about the Kravek. Reptilian, aliens who treated other species like livestock, capturing them for slave markets or their brutal entertainment arenas. The few humans who had escaped their clutches told stories that gave children nightmares. The ship shook again, this time from the heavy footsteps of something large moving through the corridors above them. Tom's fingers never stopped working, but Amy could see the defeat creeping into his shoulders. "The escape pods?" she asked. "Already launched. The captain got most of the crew off before the Kravek cut our engines." He looked at her then, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. "I stayed behind to give them more time to get away." "Then let's go. There have to be more pods somewhere." Tom shook his head, slowly. "Someone needs to keep the reactors stable or they'll overload and take out the Kravek ship too. Might give the pods time to reach the nearest system." The sound of heavy footsteps was getting closer now, along with a strange clicking, noise that made Amy's skin crawl. She understood what her father was planning, and every cell in her body rebelled against it. "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." Tom's voice had the tone that meant arguing was useless. "You're going to hide in the auxiliary reactor housing. Until this is over. The radiation shielding will mask your heat signature from their scanners." The engineering bay door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. 3 creatures that looked like walking nightmares pushed through the gap, their scaled hides gleaming in the emergency lights. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated skulls full of razor teeth and eyes like black glass. The leader carried a weapon that crackled with electric energy. Tom stepped protectively in front of Amy, wrench in hand like it might actually matter against creatures like these. The lead Kravek said something in a language that sounded like grinding stone, then switched to heavily accented English. "Human slaves, come quiet or die loud." "Over my dead body," Tom said. The alien tilted, its massive head as if considering the offer. "If prefer." What happened next took only seconds, but Amy would remember every detail for the rest of her life. Her father lunged forward with the wrench, aiming for what he hoped was a vital spot. The Kravek leader moved with fluid grace, catching Tom's wrist and lifting him off his feet like he weighed nothing. The electric weapon discharged with a sound like breaking thunder. Amy screamed and started forward, but the second Kravek had already spotted her. A massive clawed hand closed around, her arm lifting her easily despite her struggles. She tried to bite, scratch, kick, anything to get free, but it was like fighting a machine. The leader dropped Tom's still form and studied Amy with those terrible black eyes. It spoke again in its grinding language to the others, and she caught enough of the tone to know they were discussing her like a piece of meat. "Small human," the leader finally said in English. "Weak, but arena master Thek like exotic fighters. Bring good price." Amy stopped struggling as the words sank in. Arena master fighters. They weren't just taking her as a slave. They were taking her to die for entertainment. The Kravek carried her through corridors now filled with smoke and the bodies of crew members who had tried to fight. She forced herself to memorize every detail, every turn, every layout of the ship. If she was going to survive whatever came next, she needed to start learning everything she could about her enemies. They dragged her to a transport shuttle that had attached itself to the Meridian's edge like a parasite. Inside, she saw two other survivors from the crew, both unconscious and secured in restraints that looked designed for creatures much larger than humans. The Kravek threw her into a similar harness and activated some kind of stasis field that left her aware but unable to move. As the shuttle detached from the dying mining ship, Amy watched through a small porthole as the Meridian's edge drifted away into the black. Somewhere in that wreckage was her father's body and the only life she had ever known. The Kravek thought they had captured just another weak human to break for their amusement. They had no idea what they had just awakened. The roar from 50,000 alien throats hit Amy like a physical wall as the arena gates ground open. Dust and sand swirled in the artificial wind created by the massive crowd's movement, and the smell of blood, both old and fresh, filled her nostrils. She had spent 3 days in the holding cells beneath the Grand Colosseum, listening to the sounds of combat and death filtering down through the stone floors. Now it was her turn. Arena Master Thek had visited her cell the night before. His scaled face twisted into what might have been amusement. He had explained the rules in his grinding voice, though Amy suspected the explanation was more for his own entertainment than her benefit. There were no rules, really. Enter the arena, fight until one fighter could not continue, leave alive, or leave dead. "Human too small," he had said, running one clawed finger along the energy bars that kept her caged. "Make good quick show before real fights begin." Amy had said nothing then, just as she said nothing now as she walked across the blood-stained sand toward the center of the arena. The crowd was laughing, pointing at her small frame in the ill-fitting armor they had given her. She could hear individual voices in the chaos, betting on how many seconds she would last. Her opponent waited at the far end of the arena, and Amy felt her heart skip despite her attempts to stay calm. Grok was a member of the Gorthak species, standing nearly 10 feet tall with arms like tree trunks and hide that looked thick enough to stop bullets. His species was famous throughout the galaxy for their incredible strength and near invulnerability. The arena master had not been subtle about wanting this fight to end quickly, but Amy had advantages that none of the screaming aliens in the stands could see or understand. During her 3 days in the cells, she had watched and listened. She had studied every fighter, cataloged their movements, identified their strengths and weaknesses. More importantly, she had done what humans had been doing for millions of years. She had learned to hunt. The starting horn sounded, a deep note that seemed to come from the arena floor itself. Grok raised his massive arms and charged across the sand with surprising speed for something so large. The crowd's laughter grew louder as Amy appeared to freeze in terror. She was not frozen. She was calculating. Grok covered the distance between them in seconds, his tree-trunk arms swinging in devastating arcs that could have crushed her bones to powder. But Amy was no longer where his attacks were aimed. At the last possible moment, she moved with fluid grace, slipping to the side as his massive fist pounded into the sand where she had been standing. The crowd's laughter faltered slightly. That had been closer than they expected. Amy circled around Grok's left side, staying just out of reach as he turned to face her. She had noticed something during her time in the cells, something that none of the other fighters seemed to understand. Every species had pressure points, places where nerve clusters or blood vessels came close to the surface. Humans had learned to exploit these weaknesses in Earth's predators long before they ever reached for the stars. Grok swung again, a backhand that would have taken Amy's head off if it had connected. Instead, she ducked low and rolled forward, coming up inside his guard where his massive reach worked against him. Before he could react, her fist drove into a spot just below his ribcage where she had observed a slight discoloration in his hide. The giant Gorthak warrior gasped and stumbled backward, confusion replacing the confident hunger in his eyes. No opponent had ever gotten close enough to strike him there, and the sudden sharp pain was completely unexpected. Amy did not give him time to recover. She moved like water, flowing around his desperate attempts to grab her, striking at nerve, clusters, and pressure points with surgical precision. Each blow was carefully placed, designed not just to cause pain but to disrupt his nervous system and throw off his coordination. The crowd had gone completely silent now. This was not how arena fights were supposed to go. Smaller fighters were meant to die quickly and dramatically, not systematically dismantle larger opponents with techniques no one had ever seen before. Grok was growing desperate, his swings becoming wilder and less controlled as Amy's attacks accumulated their effect. She could see the confusion and fear growing in his eyes as his own body began to betray him. Muscles that had never failed him before were not responding properly, and his balance was becoming increasingly unsteady. Amy saw her opening when Grok overextended himself in a massive downward strike that buried his fist 6 inches into the arena sand. She moved behind him faster than the crowd could follow, her arm snaking around his thick neck in a hold that cut off the blood flow to his brain. The technique was completely alien to every species watching. They understood crude strangulation, but this was something far more sophisticated. Amy had positioned her grip precisely to compress the major arteries while avoiding the windpipe, cutting off the brain's blood supply without the obvious struggle of suffocation. Grok thrashed for several seconds, his massive strength making the hold difficult to maintain, but Amy had physics on her side. The blood flow to his brain was completely cut off, and no amount of physical power could change that basic biological reality. The great warrior's legs gave out first, then his arms stopped their desperate reaching. In less than 30 seconds, the supposedly invincible Gorthak fighter collapsed unconscious to the arena sand, defeated by techniques he could not understand and had no defense against. The silence stretched for what felt like hours before Arena Master Thek's voice boomed. Across the Colosseum, "Winner! Human!" The crowd exploded in a chaos of confusion, outrage, and sudden excitement. Amy stood over Grok's still form, breathing hard, but showing no expression. She looked up at the VIP box where Thek sat surrounded by other wealthy Kravek, meeting his black gaze directly. She could see the wheels turning in his reptilian mind. What was supposed to be a brief, profitable execution had just become something far more interesting and far more valuable. Amy turned and walked toward the exit gate, ignoring the deafening noise around her. She had won her first fight, but she knew this was just the beginning. The arena master's greed would ensure she fought again soon, and each victory would bring more dangerous opponents. But she had proven something important today, both to herself and to every alien watching. Humans were not the weak, fragile creatures the galaxy believed them to be. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors. The notification sound from Arena Master Thek's personal communicator had been going off constantly for the past week. Booking requests, interview demands, and betting syndicate offers flooded in from across 3 star systems. all because of one small human who had turned his simple entertainment into the most talked-about phenomenon in the gladiatorial circuits. Amy counted 17 opponents since her victory over Grok. 17 different species, each supposedly superior to humans. In combat, each fallen to techniques they could not understand or counter. The crowds that once laughed at her now filled the Colosseum to capacity, their voices creating a thunderous roar that could be heard from orbit. Today's opponent was something special, though. The Vorth were crystalline beings from the high gravity, worlds near the galactic core, their bodies made of living diamond that could deflect energy weapons and crush steel with ease. They moved like living statues, beautiful and deadly, with combat forms perfected over thousands of years. Amy studied her opponent through the gate as the crowd settled into expectant silence. This Vorth stood 8 feet tall, its crystalline body refracting the arena lights into dancing rainbows across the sand. Its name was Resonance of Deep Thunder, according to the announcer, and it had never been defeated in 43 matches. But Amy had spent the last week doing more than just fighting. During the long hours between matches, she had been learning. Her engineering background gave her insights that other fighters lacked, and she had noticed something interesting about the Vorth during their previous arena appearances. Sound affected them differently than it affected other species. Not just loud noises, but specific frequencies that seemed to cause them discomfort. Amy had listened carefully to their vocalizations, watched how they moved, and formed a theory that she was about to test with her life. The starting horn sounded, but instead of charging or circling like her previous opponents, Resonance of Deep Thunder stood perfectly still. Its crystalline form began to vibrate slightly, and Amy realized it was analyzing her through some kind of harmonic sensing ability. This was going to be more challenging than brute force opponents. Amy moved first, not toward her opponent, but toward the arena wall. The crowd murmured in confusion as she pressed her palm against the stone and sand barrier that surrounded the fighting area. She was listening, feeling for something that her human senses could detect, but alien minds might miss. The Grand Colosseum had been built for acoustics. Every sound, every roar from the crowd was carefully channeled and amplified by the architecture. Amy could feel the resonance patterns in the walls themselves, the way sound waves bounced and reflected throughout the massive structure. Resonance of Deep Thunder finally moved, flowing across the sand like liquid light. Its crystalline arms extended into razor-sharp blades as it closed the distance between them with surprising grace. Amy barely managed to roll aside as those diamond-hard edges sliced through the air where her head had been. But she was not trying to engage in direct combat. Instead, she was positioning herself at specific points around the arena, using her voice in ways that no previous opponent had attempted. She began with a low humming sound, barely audible over the crowd noise, but pitched at a frequency that made the Vorth warrior pause mid-strike. Amy had noticed during her observation that Vorth crystals vibrated sympathetically to certain sound frequencies. Their entire species had evolved on worlds where harmonic resonance was a natural phenomenon, and their crystalline bodies were essentially living tuning forks. She changed the pitch of her humming, using the arena's acoustics to amplify and focus the sound waves. The Vorth's perfect fighting stance wavered slightly as unexpected vibrations ran through its crystal matrix. Amy moved to a different position and tried a higher frequency, watching as hairline cracks appeared along her opponent's arm. The crowd had gone silent again, but this time it was not confusion. They could sense they were witnessing something unprecedented. This human was not just fighting her opponent. She was turning the arena itself into a weapon. Amy found the resonance frequency she had been searching for and held the note steady, using techniques she remembered from her father's lessons about acoustic engineering. Every material had a natural frequency at which it would vibrate apart, and living crystal was no different from any other material in the universe. Resonance of Deep Thunder tried to charge forward to end the fight before the sound waves could do more damage, but it was too late. The harmonic frequency had found its mark, and the crystalline warrior's body began to vibrate in synchronization with Amy's voice and the arena's acoustic amplification. The cracks spread rapidly across the Vorth's crystalline form as its own body turned against it. What had been its greatest strength, the unbreakable diamond hardness of its crystal matrix, became its fatal weakness when subjected to precisely tuned harmonic vibration. Resonance of deep thunder shattered like a wine glass, struck by a soprano's high note. The silence that followed was absolute. 50,000 alien spectators stared in shock at the pile of crystal fragments that had been an invincible warrior moments before. Amy stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard from the sustained vocal effort, surrounded by the glittering remains of her opponent. Arena Master Thek's voice finally broke the silence, though even his booming announcement sounded stunned. "Winner! Human!" But Amy barely heard him. She was looking up at the crowd, seeing something that made her heart race with possibilities she had not considered before. Fear. For the first time since her capture, she was seeing genuine fear in alien eyes as they stared down at her. They were beginning to understand what she had known from the moment she set foot in the arena. Every species had weaknesses. Every supposedly superior alien warrior had vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone who understood how to look for them. And humans, it turned out, were very good at finding weaknesses. As she walked back toward the fighter's gate, Amy noticed the way other gladiators looked at her now. The mockery and dismissal had been replaced by respectful distance and whispered conversations in languages she did not recognize. Word was spreading through the holding areas beneath the arena, carried by fighters who were beginning to realize that everything they thought they knew about combat had just changed. In his private box high above the arena floor, Arena Master Thek was already calculating profits from the bidding war that would surely follow news of this match. Every arena master in the galaxy would want to showcase the human who could turn physics itself into a weapon. But Amy was thinking about something else entirely as the gate closed behind her. She was thinking about the other human survivors who had been taken with her, and about the growing realization that her victories were creating opportunities that had not existed before. The galaxy thought they were watching entertainment. What they were actually witnessing was the beginning of something that would change the balance of power among the stars. They just did not know it yet. General Voss had seen enough combat in his 40 years of service to the Kravek Empire that very little surprised him anymore. He had led planetary invasions, crushed rebellions, and personally executed the leaders of a dozen species that had dared to challenge Kravek supremacy. But the holographic recording playing on his command center screen made his scaled hide crawl with something he had not felt in decades: uncertainty. The human female stood motionless in the center of the arena, surrounded by the crystalline remains of what had been one of the most feared gladiators in the known galaxy. She showed no emotion, no triumph, just cold calculation as she studied the crowd's reaction to her impossible victory. Voss paused the recording and enhanced the image, focusing on the human's face. Amy Torres, according to the intelligence files. His agents had compiled 19 standard years old, no military training, no combat experience before her capture. By every measure his species used to evaluate threats, she should have been dead within minutes of her first fight. Instead, she had won 27 consecutive matches against opponents that represented the pinnacle of galactic martial prowess. "Show me the tactical analysis again," Voss growled to his aide, a younger Kravek officer who had been tasked with studying human combat techniques. The aide activated another holographic display, this one showing movement patterns and strike analyses from Amy's fights. "General, our combat specialists have identified several disturbing patterns. The human does not rely on superior strength or natural weapons like other species. Instead, she appears to analyze each opponent for structural weaknesses and exploit them using techniques we have never encountered. Voss studied the data with growing unease. The humans' victory methods read like a catalog of alien anatomical vulnerabilities. Pressure point strikes that disrupted nervous systems, choke holds that cut off blood flow to the brain, harmonic frequencies that could shatter crystalline opponents, and tactical positioning that turned opponents' advantages into fatal weaknesses. What concerns me most, the aide continued, is that she appears to be learning and adapting between fights. Each victory teaches her more about galactic species, and she applies that knowledge to subsequent opponents with increasing efficiency. The general's claws scraped against the metal of his command chair. One human civilian with no training has identified and exploited weaknesses in species that our military considers among the most formidable in the galaxy. What does that suggest about human military capabilities? The aide's silence was answer. Enough. Voss activated his communication array and transmitted a priority message to the Kravek High Command. Priority Alpha. Request immediate consultation regarding potential strategic threat. Human combat analysis attached. While he waited for a response, Voss turned his attention to another problem. Arena Master. Thek's greed was making the situation worse by the day. Every victory brought more media attention, more analysis of human capabilities, and more opportunities for other species to study human combat techniques. The communication array chimed with an incoming message from High Command. General Kor, Supreme Military Commander of the Kravek Empire, appeared as a hologram in the center of the room. Voss, I have reviewed your analysis. Are you seriously suggesting that this single human represents a military threat to the Empire? I'm suggesting, sir, that if one untrained human civilian can systematically defeat our finest gladiatorial champions, we need to reconsider our assumptions about human military potential. What happens when we encounter trained human soldiers using these techniques? Kor's massive form shifted as he considered the implications. The humans have no interstellar military. Our intelligence confirms they barely have a unified planetary government. A few mining colonies and transport ships do not constitute a threat. Sir, with respect, our intelligence also suggested that humans were physically inferior and unsuited for combat. The arena recordings suggest otherwise. The Supreme Commander was quiet for several moments, studying data feeds from his own command center. Very well. I am authorizing Operation Silent Strike. Eliminate the human before she can provide more. Intelligence to potential enemies. Make it look like an arena accident. Voss felt a moment of relief, but Kor was not finished. However, Arena Master Thek has significant political connections, and this human has become extremely profitable. Any action must be subtle and deniable. I suggest you arrange a special exhibition match designed to exploit whatever weaknesses humans might possess. After the transmission ended, Voss began planning. He had studied every recording of Amy's fights, looking for patterns and limitations. While humans appeared to have significant advantages in individual combat, they might be vulnerable to coordinated mass assault. More importantly, every victory had been achieved through careful analysis and preparation. What would happen if she faced opponents she had no time to study, using tactics she had never encountered? 3 days later, Amy received notice of her next match. Instead of the usual single opponent, she would face what the announcement called the Ultimate Challenge. 20 fighters from across the galaxy, representing species she had never encountered before, all at the same time. The betting odds heavily favored her death. Arena Master Thek visited her cell personally to explain the new format. His black eyes gleaming with anticipated profits. Special request from very important clients, he said. They want to see if human can handle real challenge. Amy studied the holographic profiles of her upcoming opponents. Several species she had never seen before, with no previous arena recordings to analyze. They included hive mind warriors that fought in perfect coordination, shapeshifters that could adapt their forms during combat, and energy beings that existed partially outside normal physical space. But Amy had been preparing for something like this. During her weeks in the arena, she had been more than just a fighter. She had been a teacher, showing other gladiators techniques and concepts they had never considered. She had formed alliances with fighters from different species, creating bonds of mutual respect and shared knowledge. The other gladiators had been watching and learning too. They had seen what happened when different species worked together instead of simply trying to overpower each other. They had learned that cooperation could be more powerful than individual strength. As Amy prepared for what might be her final fight, she was not planning to face 20 opponents alone. She was planning something that had never happened in the history of the Grand Colosseum, a revolution. The galaxy thought they were about to witness the execution of a troublesome human. What they were actually about to see was the birth of something that would reshape the foundations of galactic civilization. General Voss watched from his command ship as the arena prepared for the ultimate challenge, confident that he had found the solution to the human problem. He had no idea that he was about to trigger the very war he had been trying to prevent. The morning of the ultimate challenge dawned with an unusual quiet in the gladiator holding areas beneath the Grand Colosseum. Conversations that normally filled the corridors with the sounds of a dozen different languages had dropped to whispers, and even the guards seemed nervous as they made their rounds. Amy sat in her cell, apparently meditating, but actually listening to the subtle communication network that had developed among the fighters over the past weeks. A series of coded taps on cell walls, scratches on metal bars, and seemingly casual conversations carried messages throughout the underground complex. Nex, the scarred insectoid warrior who had become her closest ally, appeared at her cell bars during the morning meal distribution. His mandibles clicked in what she had learned was his species' equivalent of a grim smile. 20 fighters above, he whispered in his broken but improving English. But 40 fighters down here know what happens today. Amy nodded. She had spent weeks teaching the other gladiators concepts that were completely foreign to their species. Cooperation instead of competition, strategic thinking instead of brute force. Most importantly, the idea that their captors were not invincible gods, but simply another species with their own weaknesses and limitations. The plan they had developed was ambitious beyond anything attempted in the arena's history. While Amy faced the ultimate challenge above, the gladiators below would begin their own battle for freedom. As the guards came to escort her to the preparation chambers, Amy exchanged glances with fighters from a dozen different species. Each had volunteered for what they all knew was likely a suicide mission, but they had learned something from watching her fight. Sometimes death fighting for freedom was better than life lived in chains. The roar of the crowd was deafening as Amy emerged into the arena, but she could hear something different in their voices today. The excitement was mixed with bloodlust and anticipation of her death. General Voss had done his work well, ensuring that this fight would be presented as the ultimate test of human limitations. 20 alien warriors waited for her in the center of the arena, representing species she had never encountered and tactics she had never seen. They had been chosen specifically for their ability to coordinate attacks and exploit the numerical advantage that should overwhelm any individual fighter. Arena Master. Thek's voice boomed across the Colosseum as he explained the special rules for the ultimate challenge. Amy barely listened. She was counting seconds in her head, waiting for the moment when the plan would begin. The starting horn sounded, and 20 deadly aliens moved toward her with coordinated precision. Amy ran, not toward them but along the arena wall, buying precious time as she analyzed their formation and movement patterns. 30 seconds after the horn, explosions echoed up from below as the gladiator rebellion began. The first blast came from the guard armory, where Nex and 3 other fighters had used techniques Amy taught them to disable Kravek security systems. The second explosion destroyed the main power coupling for the arena's energy barriers. Chaos erupted in the stands as emergency lighting activated and the sound of combat filtered up from the gladiator levels. Arena Master Thek's voice cut through. the confusion, ordering security forces to suppress the uprising below, but it was too late. Amy had taught them well. The gladiators fought with human tactics now, using coordination and intelligence instead of individual prowess. They moved in teams, covering each other's weaknesses and combining their unique abilities in ways that confounded their Kravek guards. In the arena above, Amy's 20 opponents hesitated as the sounds of rebellion echoed around them. That moment of uncertainty was all she needed. She had been planning for this exact scenario, and her strategy was simple: turn their coordination against them. Amy launched herself at the weakest point in their formation, a crystalline fighter similar to the Vorth she had defeated weeks earlier. But instead of trying to destroy it, she used it as a living shield, positioning herself so that the other fighters could not attack without risking harm to their teammate. The coordinated assault fell apart as fighters found themselves blocking each other's attacks and struggling to maintain formation while protecting their crystalline ally. Amy moved like liquid through their ranks, never staying in one place long enough to be cornered, always using their numbers against them. But the real battle was happening throughout the arena complex now. Gladiators who had learned human concepts of teamwork and tactical thinking were systematically overwhelming their captors. Security barriers that had seemed impregnable fell to coordinated assaults. Communication systems that had controlled the entire complex went dark as fighters who had learned to think strategically struck at the infrastructure instead of just fighting individual guards. Above in the stands, panic was spreading as the crowd realized that the entertainment had become something far more dangerous. This was not a gladiatorial match anymore. It was a revolution. Amy finished her fight by using the arena's acoustic systems to create a harmonic frequency that shattered 3 crystalline opponents simultaneously while causing neural disruption in several others. The remaining fighters, seeing their coordinated tactics fail against human adaptability, began to retreat. But Amy was no longer interested in individual victories. She scaled the arena wall with techniques her father had taught her for climbing through starship maintenance shafts, reaching the lower stands where Kravek spectators were trying to flee. Her voice carried across the chaos, amplified by the arena's communication system that the gladiators had captured. She spoke in heavily accented Kravek, words she had learned during her captivity. "People of the galaxy," she said, switching to the common trade language that most species understood. "Today you have seen what happens when the oppressed refuse to accept oppression. This is Amy Torres of Earth, and I speak for every human who has been captured, enslaved, or killed by the Kravek Empire." Throughout the complex, gladiators had taken control of the broadcasting systems, ensuring that her words reached across the known galaxy. "We did not start this war, but we will finish it. Every human death will be answered. Every act of cruelty will be repaid. We are coming for our people, and we are bringing friends." By the time General Voss's military forces reached the Grand Colosseum, it was too late. The gladiators had commandeered Kravek ships and scattered to different star systems, carrying with them the knowledge and techniques that Amy had taught them. But more importantly, they carried a message that spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Oppressed species throughout Kravek space began to rise up, inspired by the impossible sight of gladiators working together under human leadership. Amy stood on the bridge of a captured Kravek warship, surrounded by alien allies who had chosen to follow her into an uncertain future. The navigation charts showed dozens of worlds where human colonists were held captive and resistance movements were already forming. General Voss received reports throughout the day of uprisings on 17 different worlds, all coordinated, and all using tactical concepts that bore the unmistakable signature of human strategic thinking. The last transmission from the Grand Colosseum before it went completely dark was Amy's voice, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Amy Torres. We are going home, and we are not going alone. The galaxy is about to learn what humans do to those who hurt their families. In the depths of space, human merchant vessels that had been carrying nothing more dangerous than mining equipment and farming supplies began to change course, responding to coded messages that had been spreading through their communication networks. Earth had received word that their children were in danger and Earth was coming to collect them.